It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello, and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
Today we're discussing The Cinder House by Freya Marsk.
Yes.
I believe I said Marsky when we did the last book that we did by this author, which is, at least according to the way the audiobook narrator pronounced it, not correct. So my apologies for that. Would you like to do the plot of this book, or shall I?
I would just describe this as it's a Cinderella retelling, except Cinderella is a ghost.
Yeah.
Extremely bisexual Cinderella retelling, except Cinderella is a ghost.
It's a Cinderella retelling with that Freya Marsk sauce. And if you're familiar with her earlier work, we'll get into what that means, or what that means to us as we go. But
there's also a little bit of Bluebeard mixed in.
But like, if you know how Cinderella goes, there's the plot. And we're not going to spoil how the happy ending turns out, because figuring out how the happy ending turns out is, I think, a large quantity of the pleasure that this book has to offer.
Yes. How are we going to resolve this one?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes. There's a wizard-ish. There are magic users. There are sorcerers everywhere. There's a father who's responsible ultimately for a lot of the problems, or partially responsible for a lot of the problems.
And there's also the fairy, who's definitely a wizard.
Yeah.
Quaint.
Quint, the fairy,
Quint.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we don't have any lesbians per se, but Ella is, like, as you mentioned earlier, extremely bisexual. So,
yes, there's also an extremely bisexual princess.
Plenty to go around there.
Oh, but do they fight? Not really.
The fighting mostly takes place between magic users that are not our hero.
Yes.
Yes, but go ahead.
Why should you read this book? I found it to be a short, charming little piece as far as I'm not a huge fan of fairy tale retellings, but I thought that this one did manage to put a little bit of a new spin on Cinderella, and I found it just to be very charming.
Yeah. About like halfway through, I was like, yeah, this is Cinderella. It certainly is. And the amount of things that needed to click into place to keep that going was starting to get a little bit tedious to me. But I found myself interested in the structure of what was going on, and and also, like, there's extra. I think that's the thing with Freya Marsk books, is that it's always a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. Like, both the interpersonal dynamics are a little bit more complicated than they need to be. The plot is a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, and the sort of the resolution is more complicated than it needs to be. And
but in a good way.
Exactly. Like, I say that all in glowingly positive terms, because needs to be creates a book that we're not interested in talking about as a general matter.
Right. Like, I feel like Freya Marsk is actually one of a handful of authors who pretty much gives you the book that's promised. It, like, doesn't aim incredibly ambitious, but really nails what they aim for. And on top of that is just everything is a little bit smarter than would need to be to pull off a competent example of whatever it is that they're writing.
Mm-hmm. And hornier.
Yes.
So that depending on the reader, that is either why you should or why you shouldn't, because once again, things get, like, remarkably horny really abruptly in this one, in the same way they did in the last Freya Marsk books that we did, although not as constantly or consistently.
Yes, I gotta say that if most romantasy were more like this, I would like romantasy a lot more. Because I generally think of romantasy as being, it's fantasy but hornier. And then I check out something that's actually romantasy, and I'm like, oh no, actually this is just boring.
Yeah.
This is what I wish romantasy were.
Marsk again has the gift of writing well about sex, at least, and of course this is a more person to person thing than most in this admittedly extremely subjective field of book criticism that we have embarked upon. But
Yes.
at least to my taste, she's very good at writing about sex and does it in an interesting way. And so,
Yeah, well, it definitely feels like she's not just like everything always. I think that she does well is that all of her, sexual dynamics feel very rooted in the individual characters and their issues and their context.
oh yeah,
And so, which, I do feel like a lot of sex scenes in books are very kind of paint by numbers here. We're just putting in all the things that, people want in their porn. And that it isn't particular that, you could swap out one sex scene for another in across a half dozen books and wouldn't even notice.
yeah, not the case in this one.
Right. And I think that, for me, that's like, I want the sex scenes to be doing something.
Yes.
Even if it's just sort of, affirming character dynamics. And I think that is something that she is one of the authors that we've covered who actually does that really well.
Mm. Yeah. So having said that, why shouldn't you read this one?
Well, it's a fairy tale retelling. And it is smarter than it needs to be, but it is still very much doing that thing that a Cinderella retelling does.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that really that's the only reason that I can think of. Like if you're like, God, I don't want to read another fairy tale retelling, then I don't think there's anything about this one that will change your mind about that necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you're lukewarm about it, I think that this is going to be, you're still going to have a good time. And again, quite short. You're not.
Yeah, it's a novella, I'm pretty sure.
You're not really investing a huge amount of time or effort into this one. And I think that there's a lot in it,
Yeah.
Given again the scope of what it's trying to be, I think that it has some interesting, moral lessons in it and some interesting things to say about the world. And it's not, and I think it's weird enough, which is the thing that we always complain about.
Right.
It's messy, but still satisfying.
Yes, and particularly for a fairy tale retelling, especially sort of a Disney-esque fairy tale. Messy and weird is hard to find. So,
yeah.
So content warnings.
And before we get to content warnings, I should say messy and weird, but also doesn't have that thing that I often complain about with fairy tale retellings, where they try to update the moral lessons for a modern sensibility, and not realize that the old moral lesson is so in the bones of the old story that it doesn't work. This one does not have that issue.
Yeah. No, it does manage to feel fairly true to the fairy tale, even as it's adding a bunch of stuff in.
Mm-hmm. And it's also manages to do sort of default bisexuality in a way that doesn't annoy me. It actually does a lot of things that usually annoy me in a way that doesn't annoy me in this particular case, which is actually a real good recommendation, I think. But yes, content warnings.
Yes. Murder. There's some sex stuff that doesn't feel 100% consensual, like around the dancing.
Spousal and just domestic abuse generally, torture, like a lot of torture in this book, actually, inventive torture.
Yes. Sexual assault of a minor by one of their teacher figures. Happens off screen, but does happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, a lot going on. And body horror to the extent that Ella's house is the body.
Yeah, no, definitely. The torture scenes involving Ella's house being the body are definitely body horror-esque.
Mm. Yeah. And bad moms, bad dads. I mean, it's Cinderella.
Yeah. And murder of small animals off screen, but referenced.
Yes. All right. We may think of something else, but let's talk about it.
Yeah.
This plot's a magic trick, a happy ever after made with strange arithmetic. And needless to say, the pleasure is in finding out just how it ends that way. Hey, so we've been spoiling the end of Cinderella, but from here on in, we're spoiling everything else. So I think like the major thing of interest to talk about. I mean, there's actually a few major things of interest to talk about, but for my money, the most interesting departure, because it's the one that you mentioned in the like 5-second plot summary, is that Ella is dead.
Yes,
she's dead, circa the first page of the book.
Yeah, she dies on page 1, and
one might expect that she's going to miraculously come back to life at some point, but thankfully that does not happen.
Yeah. And I definitely, part of the tension for me reading was, how is the author going to provide a happy ending that doesn't involve bringing this person back to life? Because bringing Ella back to life would definitely have made the story fall very flat.
Yeah. And she manages it via what I can only describe as some strange arithmetic.
But it felt earned. Like it definitely felt like she'd done a good job of building up the rules of the world and the magic, such that seemed like the natural thing for them to do.
Yes. And I think that like when I see a book that is like, okay, we've set up the stakes and the stakes are this, that we are living enough in the real world that a bad thing has happened that cannot be fixed, or at least cannot be completely fixed. We're dealing with, the reality of politics, or the reality of revolution, or the reality of abuse and trauma, where you can't, wake up tomorrow and not have been abused or traumatized. Like that's not on the list. And so how do we arrive at a satisfying ending? You can either have a depressing ending, or you can cheat the ending, or you can do what I think is a rare and valuable thing, which is to, via, again, the use of like wandering off the map and back again, like violating rules, but in a way that feels mystical or revelatory, or, like a strange...
Or within the rules of the metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. Like part of the strange personal metaphor that you've developed here, that you're still giving us a way that this person can end up having, if not a normal life, if not everything that she hoped her life would be, if not a life that is unconstrained by her disability, her disability of being dead in this case.
Yes.
That at least a life where she can be happy and where good things can happen to her.
Yeah.
And I think that's valuable, because particularly if you're a depressed person who likes to read depressing literature, ones that convincingly posit that there might be, good outcomes in the world are hard to find, and worth celebrating when you come across them. So
particularly ones that don't involve a cure narrative. I mean, so the author makes this, explicitly says this is a story about chronic illness. I think maybe even I can't remember if it's explicitly long COVID or if I just thought of that because that's my current big chronic illness. But well, I'm not sure overall that the being trapped in the house as a ghost necessarily captured my experience of my chronic illness. I do feel like it did a good job. The resolution in particular did a good job of capturing no, this is just how you live now. And it's not what you wanted, and it's never going to be what you wanted, but it's still a reasonably happy, existence, if not life. And so I felt that the story throughout didn't quite, I did not pick up that this was supposed to be a chronic illness story reading throughout, but reaching the end, I thought that it did a good job of sort of holding that metaphor for whatever your chronic illness might be. Like it works just as well for depression or PTSD as it does for, long COVID or CFS or whatever.
Sure. I mean, I didn't read the afterword or whatever, because it wasn't in the audiobook, obviously. But it was, um, with the, with
Paratextual materials are important.
yeah, but I didn't get the author statement. And so that wasn't on my mind, but it was definitely one of the things that I was thinking about, because all of the way through the book, I was thinking, okay, what does her being dead represent? Like, what does this mean? What is the metaphor here? And, I said disability earlier. So,
Yeah.
chronic illness definitely falls into that category. Like, being an abuse victim who has internalized the logic of their abuse was the one that made the most sense to me.
Yeah, well, in particular, I mean, ghosts generally are really good PTSD and abuse. You know, ghost stories are really good for that because they're all about the things that, you thought are gone and hidden and yet, continue to haunt.
Yeah, and having to continuously return to the scene of the crime, as it were, or not being
right.
able to
Yeah,
stop.
exactly. Like not being able to move on.
Mm-hmm. Being stuck perseverating over old stories and old wounds. The her haunting being specifically a grudge and a resentment.
Yeah.
Is, works very well with that, and her inability to not like clean up after the people who are abusing her, like her
that worked so well.
Like her internal compulsion to continue to be the one who fixes things. Like as far as character narrative goes, it's like Ella is the one who is like stuck with this, compulsive desire to make things okay and to be the kid who fixes things.
Yes.
Which is, again, it works really well with the abuse metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
So that feels more like a compelling reading to me than the chronic illness reading, but I don't think they're at all mutually exclusive. I think that you can take whatever you want away from this.
Yeah, no, but I agree that ended up being what I thought came through more clearly. We'll just say that, like, as far as where the metaphor goes.
Yeah. At one point I even thought, like, is this about being closeted? Because there's a certain amount of like, my life hasn't started yet and cannot start until some fundamental truths are revealed. And
so there's definitely a thing where this is a book about alienation, and mm-hmm. there's various ways in which, like being closeted and having, and being an abuse victim and having a chronic illness are all ways in which your life is on hold and you can't move on and you're trapped. So like, it works in a lot of ways. And I think that one of the great moments in this book where, she gets to sort of sum up how, the thread that brings all this together is when she's first talking to the fairy. And she's like, yeah, I'm really resentful. I was always the weird kid, but like, there's a bunch of different ways I could have grown up to be the weird adult. And instead my weirdness has been chosen for me. Like now I'm stuck. Now I've been assigned this big giant weird thing of I'm a ghost, and I don't get to decide, I don't get to decide to be quirky or whatever. I'm just, this has, been a label stamped on my forehead. And that works really well, again, for all of these places where you can take the metaphor. Right. And I think that it also is just such a good moment of, oh yeah, of her being self-aware enough to understand why she's so resentful while still not actually having the power to move on, because actually there's a limit to how far self-actualization can get you.
Mm-hmm. Diagnosis by symptom cluster can be more of an art than a science. You can choose to change the words you use to describe your set of imperfections at your convenience, or based on the meds you'd rather take sometimes. But sometimes it's just too clear. Ella's disability is possibly the easiest one to diagnose there's ever been. Although even then, you should put a bell in your coffin. And then to go like on to the other end into like the bits of the metaphor that feel more specific. A thing that really stuck out to me as a powerful bit of the book was when she has this moment with her stepmother when they're both like temporarily on side because her stepsister is so much more awful.
Yes.
That she is able to ask her stepmother, okay, why did you kill me? And her stepmother basically says like, oh, it wasn't about you. You know, I didn't do it. I just couldn't start over again with nothing. Like you were just in the wrong. She doesn't actually say you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but that's basically what the content of it is.
But the way that she phrases it, it wasn't about you.
Yeah, as if to blame her for her self-centeredness at still
right,
being angry about being murdered.
Right, exactly.
But that moment, and then in particular when Ella goes back up to to the attic to think about it near the corpse of her murdered mother, she is like, okay, so I was murdered for no reason. So that not only has all of this happened to me, not only have I been coercively assigned this particular kind of bizarre and been given this path, but there wasn't a reason for it. There is actually no grand narrative justification for this. It isn't part of a larger, system of ideas, which means that I am, on the way to some sort of ending, even though she's actually in a story, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
But her realizing that it was in fact arbitrary, that feels like it works really well, both for the abuse victim and for the chronic illness. It's like,
right.
There's no moral valence to what happened to me. It just did,
Yep. Yeah. And then it's great because they have this moment, and does it change anything between the two of them? No.
No, it doesn't.
No, because Patrice the stepmother is still fundamentally looking out for herself and does not care about the girl that she has murdered and then kept around as domestic labor.
Yes, herself and her daughters. Is it Danica or the other one? Who's the witch daughter?
Greta is the witch daughter.
Greta is the witch daughter.
Danica is the one who's, just sort of there.
Greta is a 100% beautiful dark side monstrous child of a narcissistic parent. In the actually monstrous sense.
Yeah, actually, it's great. You've got Greta and Ella are sort of a great pair because you have the seemingly monstrous child of a narcissistic parent, who's Ella, who is a ghost, so she's quite literally a
movie monster,
a movie monster. And and is changed, right? I mean, she's a house. She doesn't look the way that she used to.
Right.
And, and then you have the one who looks normal and is in fact actually a monster.
Yeah. And Ella has, her father, it turns out, also a horrible parent.
Yeah.
I actually really like the way that that's drawn. We never really get the details of it because Ella would have been too young to internalize any of it at the time.
Right. But it's, I like that. I like that there's this reveal that, oh, okay, Patrice is in fact in her own Bluebeard fairy tale, and has done the thing that you're supposed to do in that fairy tale, but she's still the villain here because on top of that, she also murdered a young woman.
Yeah. Also a child. Yeah. She killed a child. There's no going back from that.
No,
there's no justifying that or moving past it. It's and this is again part of the abuse narrative. It's there's definitely a reason why my parent was like this. And the more that I find out about her family or his family or their family and their circumstances, the more that I understand.
But this does not justify the fact that she murdered a child.
You did in fact push a child down the stairs.
And you pushed a child down the stairs because the poison wasn't working fast enough.
Right.
This wasn't even like a momentary homicidal impulse.
So I thought that was all very well done and very well
Yes.
handled. Basically,
Yes.
is the point that I was making, and I like how flexible and interesting the choice of making her dead is. So, and that leads me to the question of how we got to the happy ending while still not cheating the fact that she's dead. I think that, like, if I have a complaint about this book,
Uh-huh.
um, it's that it hangs a big lampshade on the fairy deals bit, and then doesn't make the fairy deal a problem at all.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, the thing is that um, it is something of a problem. Like, the thing is that she loses capacity in making the fairy deal, and she never quite gets it back. There's specific things that she can do, and in some ways that actually works well with. That is the place where the chronic illness metaphor works well. Of
Oh yeah, yeah,
she's
yeah.
making compromises about where to, what parts of her health is she willing to sacrifice, and of her like capacity long term is she willing to sacrifice in exchange for expanding her life in other ways.
Right. Going to the ball does cost her, like, in a significant and permanent way.
Yeah.
No, that does make sense. Because I wasn't really thinking along the chronic illness metaphor lines, but that works more in that context than it might otherwise do. Uh, I was just thinking about Quirk in a sort of like, here is my, weird adult friend setting, when you are the traumatized kid, and the particular ways in which that can go very badly, and doesn't in along those lines in this case.
Quaint, not quirk.
Sorry, quaint. Yeah.
Quaint. Quaint, who has named herself that to make herself seem less threatening.
Yes.
Um,
But anyway, that's sort of by the by.
yeah, I mean, the thing is that more could have been done with that, but I think I do. I think that her loss of capacity, the fact that that it is permanent, even after she is, happily relocated to the castle and gets to be, both the third with the prince and the princess, and also, an intelligence asset, and that but like she does sacrifice something, and that could have been hammered home, I guess, a little bit more strongly, but it was there. So I wasn't, it didn't feel like a betrayal of the narrative rules, at least.
Yes. There is actually a third sort of fairy tale retelling in this book. It occurs to me because we haven't even talked about the prince's problem.
Right. Yeah. We also have the dancing.
Yeah, which is a sort of, it's not quite the red shoes.
It's not quite the red shoes, and it's not quite the 12 dancing princesses, but it's something a little bit like both of them.
Right. Where the prince has been cursed to be preternaturally attractive when he dances, which causes problems as he comes of age.
Yeah, I guess it's also a little bit of a Sleeping Beauty. What with the fairy christening.
Mm-hmm. I do love the sort of throwaway detail that everybody thought that he was going to be a girl until he was born, and then so the wicked witch, or the wicked fairy, shows up to do a classic princess problem to him, and then it's like, wait, are you sure this is a boy? Because I came here to do my job, which is to resentfully curse a girl, but you seem to have a boy here. Oh well, I guess we'll go ahead and do it anyway.
Right. Well, this is part of the many ways in which this is just a very queer retelling.
Yeah.
Like, aside from the fact that there's some extreme bisexuality going on, also there's just like a lot of things around gender, particularly involving the prince.
Incidentally, since this seems like a fair time to talk about, I think one of the reasons that the default bisexuality in this society works is that it's not, it does not it's not worthy of mention, right? Like, it's a little bit
Right.
scandalous. It's a problem because we still have, you know, hereditary monarchies, and so they need like the prince to marry a princess and have a kid to cement political alliances. And so, like, the problems are still there, and we still get to, sort of carry them across the roles and expectations that exist. It's just that the homophobia and the self-disgust that comes with it doesn't come into the equation, and so you can align that to make the horniness easier and more straightforward without making the world seem threadbare, or without straining one's credulity in terms of how everything else works. So I think that is...
Yeah, I guess it's a world, it feels like it's just a world where, there isn't the very specific kinds of culturally constructed homophobia that we have here. But it's not one that pretends that gender is only an aesthetic.
That's
which, you can have a society where gender is only an aesthetic, but if that's the case, then I would like to see it much more thoroughly explored. And most sort of default bisexuality stories don't
if
do
you
that
have
either.
a society where gender is just an aesthetic, you can't have princesses and princes in this way, in a hereditary monarchy. And
right, the Imperial Ratch is a good example of
that's this done well, but that's a book that is like actively about that.
Right.
And so when it's incidental, it's important not to keep the details at least a little bit consistent with the ideas.
Right. And so this one is just a world where bisexuality is, common enough, and where homophobia doesn't, where the kind of homophobia we're used to doesn't exist. But, family expectations are still family expectations.
2, 1, 2, 3, 4. The only girl wait, how do we get the dead girl to her happy ending anyway? Did we ever say? So we have this prince. They fall in love. They have a very intense fumble in the garden. I'm actually I'm making the scene more boring than it is. It's actually pretty well handled, I think, the way that it builds. And like Freya's or not Freya, but Ella's alarm at her burgeoning feelings, and trying to make sense of her feelings given that she's had zero life experience outside of reading stories. No, but how do we get the dead girl to her happy ending, though? The challenge is finding it like a fairy tale ending. Like it has to be like a really good, happy fairy tale ending within the constraints that we've already put on the story. And as you said, becoming the ultimate maid, like an anime super maid. An anime super maid who's also a ghost. There are VTubers out there who are anime maids who are also ghosts. Like, this is a shout out to Maid Mint.
Right. Well, basically what she gets to be is, a combination of major intelligence asset, and also the sort of the third in the royal throuple, but because she's also mostly an invisible ghost, this isn't a this won't be a diplomatic problem.
Indeed. And I love the way that it turns out that because I was like, oh, of course, when the reveal hit, but it didn't twig to me that the foreign princess is also the foreign scholar who she's been corresponding with.
Oh, that really? To me, that was super obvious.
If I had been thinking at all, it would have come through for me. But as it were, that was sort of a delightful surprise.
Which is great, because that's part of, she has these two emotional relationships. One being the largely parasocial relationship with the boy, the other person who's sneaking into the ballet after hours, and then also her, pen palness with the scholar. And so, of course, the boy at the ballet turns out to be the prince, and the scholar turns out to be the princess who's marrying him, and they can have their happy couple. This is the rare example where I actually feel like polyamory does solve everything in a convincing and satisfying way.
Well, I mean, the thing is that she wants two things, you know, or she wants and needs two things. And one of them is the person who she can relate to because they've also had a like systematically traumatizing past for no reason, which is the prince and his dancing problems, which have led to him being sexually assaulted and also crippled with guilt about being responsible for the deaths of multiple people who committed suicide because of their unrequited or requited attraction to him. And
right. Also, the fact that he's and you know, he's an artist who can't do his art.
He's a person who, due to a disability inflicted upon him from without, which, you know, and this is another one where like the disability is part of what made you the artist. It's a shame that it makes it really hard for you to do the art, which is a thing that we can relate to.
Yep.
You know, is that that Ellen now has somebody who can understand her in that way, but she also has this intellectual component to her, and she needs somebody who she can have like, you know, that kind of like mind to mind relationship with, which she gets out of the princess. And, you know, under normal circumstances, she wouldn't necessarily have to be in a relationship with both of these people at once. But it works out well that, you know, that they're all attracted to each other and that they're all into it sexually.
Yes. Even if Ella is basically, you know, restricted to voyeurism for the rest of her life.
Yes, which is a shame, but like they, you know, this is one of the things about living with a chronic disability is
right. This is a good example of some, you know, you can have a chronic disability and still find ways to have a satisfying sex life, if not the one that you wanted, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And it's like, this isn't, you know, I would hesitate to call this like asexual representation without caveats. But I think it's good representation for a particular kind of asexuality, where she is like a person who is still interested in sex and experiences arousal, but due to, say, trauma or disability or various other things, cannot safely engage in sexual activity with other people in a traditional way.
Yeah, I think this is. I mean, it is good to have narratives about like aspec sexuality that aren't
sex repulsed.
That aren't either sex repulsed or you know, demisexual, and it's only ever explored in the sense of it's mentioned once for the representation points, and then we have a completely conventional love story.
So, and this is not that. This is, I mean, it doesn't even like make a big deal of it. I don't know if that was even part of the authorial intent, but you know, it works that way, I think. And it's nice that everybody involved is a little bit kinky. Like, you know, we have, she's a voyeur, he's an exhibitionist. Can I make it any more obvious? And like,
Nadia apparently is pretty into the bondage thing,
which is useful and fits with what everybody else has going on. And so it's like in this situation, it's more like, well, there couldn't have been an ending where she becomes the princess, because for a number of reasons, one of which is that they need to have children in order to fulfill their political role, and that she's a ghost. And it's one of those things where it's like, and this is where what I talked about earlier with when I was talking about unusual arithmetic, using imaginary numbers. Like, is there a solution to the problem that I don't get what I want, because society and my own past has arranged things in such a way that I can't get what I want without like massively disrupting the world? Like, imagine what the story would have had to have been if like the happy ending was her marrying the prince.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, you could just dismantle the monarchy, and
which is a little bit beyond the scope of what arrives here, and would also probably
of this story
end in war, given given like the sort of the larger geopolitical situation that's being hinted at here, and
yes.
And so this instead is like, well, maybe we can come to some sort of arrangement, you know?
Yes.
And often that is in life what we have to do, is we have to come to some sort of arrangement, which, you know, and at the end of the day, everybody seems pretty happy.
Well, and I mean, part of why she gets to be happy is that, her happy ending isn't just that she gets the prince and the princess. It's that her life is still very constrained. She's still stuck in a building. But she gets both physical expansion, because now it's a much larger building. But she also gets this like mental and intellectual expansion, right? She's still traumatized and chronically ill, but she gets to learn a bunch of different languages and take all these classes so that she can be a more effective ghost spy. Which is, I definitely enjoyed that little touch of what would you do if your prince is like, by the way, not only am I marrying the princess from the weird fascist country next door, but also this is our girlfriend, the ghost. She's invisible to everybody but, us and a few other chosen people. And she's really quite bright. And just, having the royal advisors, instead of go, that sounds insane, go, oh, this is an intelligence asset. We're going to invent all sorts of Cold War era spying techniques right now.
Well, it helps that this is a world where magic is real.
Yes.
And so, like, we don't have to waste any time with, that's preposterous. But
the thing is, we don't have to waste any time with that's preposterous in terms of, okay, we believe in ghosts, but this is still, here's my extremely, socially unacceptable girlfriend.
Well, they don't say girlfriend to their parents. That's
yes,
not necessarily
but I'm sorry,
anybody's business.
when you and your fiance show up in tears with a blood-covered stone being like, we have to plant this because our favorite person who's already dead. We have to, make her at home here. We both adore her. This is clearly their ghost girlfriend. Mm-hmm. Right, but I mean, the thing is that basically this is going, okay, she's going to be the mistress. That's fine. This is, but her happy ending isn't just, oh, she gets to be the mistress. It's they're finding she's a political mistress, which, was actually a thing that happened in monarchies. And so, and in her case, is this a great ending for some people? No. But in her case, as in the case of many royal mistresses, this involves getting access to education and socialization that she otherwise would not get. And so that, feels like another way that we're sort of doing a best possible compromise under the fundamentally unjust system of monarchy.
Yeah, and part of that is the parents' attitude, because the part of this is the best possible, compromise under the system, is that these are still parents who are going to marry their son off to a woman who it doesn't matter if he loves her or not, because that is the political reality of the situation. There's no...
Fortunately, he and Nadia get along really well, but
there was no guarantee of that, absolutely. And in fact, actually, there's an open question about whether they would have gotten along this well without the intercession of this third.
Yeah, definitely. They're definitely both more into Ella than into each other, but I mean,
she certainly helped break the ice between them also.
Yes.
It helps that he has the magical ability to make people fall in love with him if it's convenient, which he can actually do under consensual, circumstances here. But the point is that these parents, because they are the king and queen of a nation which needs to continue to exist, have to be cutthroat and mercenary. And the best case scenario is that they're smart and empathetic about it. And so it makes perfect sense that literally the first thing that crosses the king's mind when he hears, oh, you can, whatever is going on in the palace is intelligence. I immediately summon the spy master. It's the king's idea.
Right.
And so it's like that is consistent with how ruthless and pragmatic he has to be under the circumstances.
Yeah.
But again,
also, I mean, as far as, royal mistresses go, at least this one, you're not going to get any illegitimate children out of.
There will be no bastards here.
No succession crisis out of this particular girlfriend. So, That's
Yeah,
great.
it worked out real well for everybody. I also enjoyed the sort of, I don't know, I enjoyed the way that the other wicked stepsister is handled. Um,
Danica or
because
Greta?
Danica, uh, the wicked stepsister who's not a psycho, you know,
Yeah, who's just sort of
murder
selfish and
mage,
kind of obnoxious.
who's the one who's a horse girl,
Yes.
um, and is going to be a horse girl, and is going to, in the Mitford sisters, she's Deborah, she's the Duchess. She's the one who just wants to raise chickens while her sisters go off and marry Hitler or so,
Yes.
and so on and so
I
forth.
will say this is actually a thing I've noticed in Cinderella retellings, and it's funny because like I don't really like Disney-esque fairy tale retellings, and yet I've somehow managed to read a bunch of them. But I feel like this is actually really common in Cinderella retellings, is that one of the wicked stepsisters is a psychopath, or at least is genuinely awful. But you know, we don't want to be misogynist, and so we have to have at least one of them be kind of, you know, to be okay. And generally, the way of making the okay one relatable without needing her to be heroic is to make her, you know, autistic.
I asked Alexis for a citation here. They gave me the story The Dryad's Shoe by T. Kingfisher, and possibly another one, but we cannot in fact guarantee this has happened more than once. But I don't think that's what happened this time. I think that Danica is still awful.
Yes, I feel like Danica does a good job of still being awful, but she's awful in the way of, well, this is what happens when, you know, you're neither the favored child nor the scapegoat in the abusive family dynamic, is you're just sort of low grade awful and you find things to be into that give you an excuse not to engage.
Yeah, and like she does what is probably the best thing that she could possibly do in the circumstances, both for her and for everybody else, which is leave
Yep.
as soon as she has a ticket out of the house, having like met a man who is interested in her.
And horses.
And horses, and it's like, yes, fine, great, I can finally get out of the house, the haunted house that I live in, with my crazy mom and my crazy sister, and like, but she's not.
Her mom's not crazy. Her mom's just a murderer.
Well, you know, with my ruthlessly pragmatic and cruel mother and my actually crazy sister,
And my dead stepsister, who's
and my dead stepsister, who I was awful to and never offered any kindness or support to, but
didn't torture, so I'm not as bad as
Right.
our other sister.
yeah, you know, family dynamics, you know how it goes.
Yes.
And that is all we had to say about that.
Let's talk about Quaint.
Yeah, I'm not, as I said earlier, I don't know what's going on there. I don't like, besides sort of as an opportunity to do some world building and establish the laws of the fairy tale world.
I mean, I think I liked that Quaint is there, you know, that despite being a, you know, useful, sort of doing the fairy godmother thing, that even at the end, Quaint is still very much looking out for herself. Like, at no point is she ever doing anything out of unselfish kindness. And that continues all the way through. Like, even at the end, she's like, great, now I've got my in at the royal family.
I think that I would have liked her to be a little bit nastier.
That's fair.
At the end of the day, like the thing about it is that she, like, you know, there's sort of this joking not joking thing that happens with Quaint where it's like, I don't know why I can't remember that she's called Quaint. There's this joking not joking thing where it's like the first time that she meets Ella, she's like, oh, what's your name? And Ella's like, I'm not telling a fairy my name. And she's like, yeah, you know,
You got
it's all,
me.
you know, slap on the back, you got me. And like that sort of continues throughout, you know, when she's like going and, you know, selling enchanted trinkets to the palace guards and all of this kind of stuff. And like, that is part of like the strategy of this kind of person. But it is, and it would be in this kind of story, but that also conceals genuine danger. And the possibly because it's just not within the scope of this story. Like, I would have just liked to have seen a hint of that danger. Because she's actually very conscientious about making sure that, Ella is giving informed consent with the glass slippers and all of that stuff. And I would have liked her to have been a little bit more capricious, a little bit more cruel, a little bit more fairy-like, or at least for us to have some idea of what she would do if she actually got access to your name,
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think that she works fairly well as sort of the narrative figure of there. It's useful to have, there's the thing, which I'm sure you remember, of being, when you're like the weird kid with the terrible family, of there's the adults who are kind enough that it's sort of this glimpse of a world outside, but aren't actually kind enough to meaningfully step in.
Yeah.
And like, I think,
the question is, how could they have meaningfully stepped in? Like, but
right.
yeah.
But sometimes, but like, there's a thing where, I think as a kid, you want to latch on to, oh, here's the adult who's actually being nice to me and who seems to actually care about what's going on with me. But there are limits. And some of it's about capacity, but some of it is also just about like, people don't necessarily always care that much about other people. And so I think that, Quint does a good job of being that figure. She's, as a like capricious fairy, you're right. Like, I think that it would have added a little bit of extra depth to have a little bit more menace underneath the surface, as opposed to sort of good-natured, well, you're a teenage ghost and I'm a huckster, so it's all in good fun. But I do think that, there's something useful about, here's the adult who's fundamentally good-natured, but, who's not actually going to go out of the way to help you.
Yeah. I think I just would have like maybe just one scene or one conversation where her, the limits of her interest in helping Ella, or the limits of her, were more of that particular, like this adult is being friendly to you, but is not actually like going to intervene on your behalf, because she does intervene on Ella's behalf. Like, it's her intervention that allows any of this to happen in the first place.
That's true. Largely out of boredom, but I mean,
yeah. But she's the fairy godmother in the original story, right?
Right.
And I guess that we're already taking a big leap from, Disney bippity boppity boo fairy godmother to like, the fae, don't tell them your name.
And that we could have just gone a little bit further with that.
We could have gone a little bit further, but when you think about where we're coming from, it's
but no, you're right. Like, there's definitely a sense of like when she's like, what you're blinking in and out is so distracting. Why don't you sit on the stool? And Ella notices that the stool that she has grown a little fairy ring around the stool, and and because actually you're right, because there's a thing going on with Quaint where I'm like, honestly, maybe it would just be an improvement if you did let this fairy stick you in a jar. Like, at least then you're not being tortured by your stepsister. And so having a little bit more sense of, no, you don't want to just completely turn yourself over to this other person, like, of why you don't want to just completely turn yourself over to this other person, would have been good. Even if it's just Ella, even if it could either be sort of menacing, or it could be Ella almost taking her up on it, and Quaint being like, no, actually, I don't want that responsibility. Either could have worked, I think, but... Agreed.
I think that there's an element of stranger danger in there, which is like, important for the story, but I could have used it to be turned up just a little bit.
Yep. Or just interrogated a little bit more.
Yeah. Do we have any other notes before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I'll note, in general, I thought that like I liked all the ways in which she is the house. Like, there's some very good visuals, the way that she's sort of walking around clutching this broken roof tile. And no,
the other thing that this story does that often annoys me, but which I really liked here because it's, just one little deconstructed remove from it is, how I always complain about describing emotions by the physical effects they have in your body, not
Yeah.
because it's inaccurate, but because it's a cliche. I was like, oh, she feels it in her cellars. It's like, great, sure. Do the thing. Hang a silly little thing on it, and I like it again because you're making it that little bit more ridiculous, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I mean, it made the torture work really well, actually. Like, which it was a good. It really managed to be sort of fantasy torture and yet feel very visceral because the story had already done a good job of setting up the ways in which the house really was her body, and so it really felt like menacing and painful to have awful things being done to the physicality of the house.
Yeah, no, and like if you're a person who's ever had to do like DIY home repair or has any interest in that sort of sphere of things, like the horrific escalation from breaking a window to sawing through one of the little frames and like cutting out a piece of that frame in terms of like the sheer amount of difficulty repairing that's going to create is just like, oh, don't do it. And so like you can feel that viscerally even if you're not feeling the actual pain in your body as well.
Yes, and I think that also it is also, I thought, a sort of a nice metaphorical thing of how, it feels to be a neurodivergent person with somebody in your space messing up your stuff. Like, it super captured the feeling of having a really bad roommate also.
Yeah. No, like awfully good, I thought. Like, and really, again, takes a simple premise and just executes it much better than your average fantasy author would.
Yeah.
And so
I definitely, I feel like this will, but it also, it still felt like it was coming from a place of love within the genre. Like, I feel like if you do like updated fairy tale retellings, you will enjoy this one. But if you think that most of them are kind of boring and thoughtless, you will still like this one because this one is neither. Cast episode worth of things to talk about.
Yeah. Didn't feel like, a tough squeeze either.
Nope.
So next time, if everything goes according to plan, we'll be talking about a classic webcomic called On a Sunbeam.
Yes, we remembered that webcomics exist also in print form, and we're going to cover a bunch of the old ones.
Indeed, from the Wizards versus Lesbians heyday, so that we're not drifting too far away from our core competencies here.
Yes. We promise that there will still be lesbians even as we slowly expand our remit.
Indeed. But until then.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.